Hello, this webinar is about temporary workers showing the differences in terms of policies and regulations between the United States and Europe. I am Carolina, and along with my colleagues Amerti, Claudia, and Sofia, we have prepared it especially for you. Hope that you find this information to be very useful. Considering the shortage of talent and the increase on the turnover rate, this webinar aims to discuss whether temporary workers are the best workforce strategy to support the company's growth. To come up with recommendations, we need to first analyze the differences of the temporary workforce in different locations. We will focus our analysis on the United States and the European Union by comparing incentive risks and regulations. These are the main topics that will be covered in this webinar. We'll review the temporary workers in the EU as well as the United States. We'll go ahead and compare and contrast, and we'll also provide our recommendations. Let's start by discussing about what is temporary workers and the main concept behind this type of workforce. Is the definition of temporary workers the same in the US and EU? In the US, temporary workers are sometimes called contractual, seasonal, or simply temps. They are contracted workers who perform a job for a short amount of time. It can be used as a trial position, try before you buy concept. With this approach, both sides, company and employee, have the opportunity to find out more about each other before making a commitment. In the European Union, temporary workers are any natural or legal person in compliance with the national law that can seek temporary employment with agencies. A temp can be hired directly by a company or work for a staffing agency that sends them out on a temporary jobs. In most cases, a temporary staffing company manages their contract, payments, and benefits. The temporary staffing company is the one that in principle should provide the instructions and pass the safety guidelines. However, sometimes there is a gray zone which leads to more occupational risks and accidents. Over the years, the advantages of having workers who could be hired and fired on short notice and were exempt from paperwork and regulatory requirements resulted in a gradual but substantial increase in the use of temporary workers. In the graph listed below, we can see between 2005 and 2017, there was a significant increase in many European countries. In 2019, 14.3% of EU workers were considered temporary compared to 3.8% of US workers that were classified as contingent. So let's take a deeper look how temporary workers are managed in Europe. For firms, it is more expensive to hire workers on a permanent contract because of strict employment protection legislation, especially when compared to the protection of fixed-term workers. And there's other costs associated with permanent contracts. For workers, tax incentives make it tempting to become self-employed or to work as an own account worker. This suggests that institutional incentives are such that both labor demand and a substantial part of labor supplies are inclined to choose flexible employment relationships. Considering that the high percentage of temporary workers, the European Parliament decided in 2008 to adopt common rules for temporary agency work. These rules were created to provide flexibility for employers who needed work for a short period of time or seasonal jobs or must manage fluctuating workforce needs and ensuring that temporary agencies workers were treated fairly. The European Parliament adopted a directive to enhance and protect the rights of temporary agency workers. The measure will require countries within the EU to adopt laws assuring that the pay and certain benefits received by temporary agency workers are the same as those provided to regular employees. The purpose of the directive is to promote flexibility combined with employment security. When the directive was established in November 2008, there was some concerns and goals between temporary workers and companies. Temporary workers believed it was difficult to find employment with equal treatment and payment. The conditions at the job site may be less than standard. Companies believed that temporary workers would not maintain increased productivity due to their status, so they would refrain from hiring temporary workers. The goal with temporary workers was to increase the quality of life, safety, and well-being for employees. It decreased negative working conditions. The directives was also applied so that each type of worker may find employment within EU, and they also promoted flexibility. On March 8, 2016, the European Commission proposed new rules for workers hired by temporary agencies established in a member state. The main component of this proposal concerned the rate of pay of posted workers, confirming the principle of equal pay for equal work at the same place. The rules were adopted by the EU in 2018. It aimed to ensure equal treatment of temporary agency workers. The member states had to amend their laws by July of 2020. What is a posted worker? A posted worker is an employee who is sent by his employer to carry out a service in another EU member state on a temporary basis in the context of a contract of services, an intergroup posting, or a hiring out through a temporary agency. For example, a service provider may win a contract in another country and send his employees there to carry out the contract. Now let's take a look at temporary workers in the United States. Staffing agencies need not become experts on specific workplace hazards, but they should determine what conditions exist at their client agencies, what hazards may be encountered, and how best to ensure protection for temporary workers. The staffing agency has the duty to inquire and verify that the host has fulfilled its responsibilities for a safe workplace. Now we'll be discussing the Joint Employer Rule in the US. The Obama administration has sought to make the manufacturer and agency legally responsible for workplace violations, even if they were independent businesses. The previous administration based this on the theory that a corporation was a joint employer with the other company, even if the former only had indirect control. This differs from the EU, where the responsibility falls mainly on the organization that pays the wages to the employee. However, the Trump administration did roll back this federal labor law. Now we'll be discussing tragedy caused to temporary workers in the United States. A temporary mill worker killed in a fall-down man lift shaft in Oregon. On December 2007, a 56-year-old temp worker died when he fell down a man lift shaft at an animal feed processing plant. A temporary hiring agency was used. Employees did receive various hours of training. There was constant inspections. The plant also followed safety guidelines. However, the employee did not speak English, so there was a language barrier. Training should be taken seriously, and each employee's situation is different. Now we'll take a closer look at temporary workers, comparing them between the United States and the European Union. European labor markets clearly use temporary contracts far more frequently. Temporary workers represent 14.3% of the European workforce compared to only 3.9% in the United States. Why does Europe use temporary workers more frequently? The key drivers behind this result are, in the US, the employment as at will, being easy and not costly to dismiss an employee. While in Europe, there are less flexible dismissal policies. American workers may be more risk because the downside of losing a job from a benefit perspective is actually considerably large. Unemployment insurance benefits are less generous and of shorter duration, and health plans are sponsored by companies. On the other hand, in the EU, there are generous health and benefit public regimes provided. The consequence of losing one's job in most European countries is unlikely to include less or more costly access to health care. Now we'll take a closer look at temporary workers' benefits in the United States. There are few benefits, no vacation and sick days, and no paid health insurance. Temporary workers have all the benefits in the EU. They have the same equal treatment as a permanent employee. They have vacation, corporate events, working times. Now we'll take a closer look at regulations. There's only the OSHA recommendation in the United States. However, in the European Union, there is a director responsible to set framework and safety standards. To support the company's growth, we recommend the following strategy. Hire permanent workers in the United States for all positions. Use only temporary workers for trial positions. Try before you buy. It is a great way to attract young talent. It can also be a good source for jobs related to the gig economy, allowing to target a global pool of candidates or high demand seasons. Use of temporary workers in our operations in Europe for entry-level positions and high-demand seasons. Establish a great partnership with a global staffing agency, defining clear roles and responsibility. Manage temporary workers as if they were your own permanent employee. It would create a sense of belonging and it will give them the opportunity for growth. Thank you.